The stars at the edge of human space did not shine any brighter than the stars anywhere else. But they felt different. Any ship captain who had ever crossed that invisible line knew it. There was something in the silence out there. Something that watched. Commander Xyrith of the Velthari Dominion did not believe in feelings. He believed in data. And the data told him that the humans were weak. His fleet of 11 ships moved through the dark slowly, sensors wide open, weapons warm but not charged. They had been careful. They had studied the humans for 3 standard cycles before this moment. They knew the patrol schedules. They knew the gaps. They knew that the humans spread their forces too thin, trying to protect too much space with too few ships. It was, in the opinion of Xyrith and the Velthari High Command, a fatal mistake. The Helios perimeter was the official boundary of human space. It was not a wall. It was not a fortress. It was a long, quiet line of sensor buoys and automated platforms drifting in orbit around nothing in particular, blinking their small lights into the void. No warship sat here. No guns pointed outward. Just the buoys, and the silence, and the stars. Xyrith looked at it through his forward viewport and almost laughed. Then the beacon spoke that it came from every direction at once, transmitted on all known frequencies, delivered in 47 galactic languages without a single moment of hesitation. The voice was calm. It was not angry. It was not afraid. It was the voice of something that did not need to be either of those things. It said, "You have reached the boundary of human space. Your vessel has been identified, logged, and catalogued. You do not have clearance to proceed. A response unit is already being dispatched. Please hold your current position." That was all. No threats. No countdown. No weapons lock warning. Xyrith turned to his senior officer, a careful older man named Orith, who had served in 3 wars and survived all of them by paying close attention to small details. Orith was staring at his sensor screen with a look on his face that Xyrith did not immediately understand. "Dispatched from where?" Xyrith asked. "There is nothing out here." Orith did not answer right away. He tapped at his screen twice, then said quietly that he was not sure. He said the sensor return was clean. No ships. No debris. Nothing but open space and the little buoys. Xyrith nodded and gave the order to proceed. What neither of them saw, and what no instrument on any of their 11 ships detected, was the small drone that had released itself from the 3rd buoy at the exact moment their lead ship crossed the line. It was no bigger than a closed fist. It moved on a magnetic pulse so faint that it registered as background noise. It attached itself to the underside of Xyrith's command vessel without a sound, without a vibration, without a single alert. Far away, on a human frontier station called Fort Alderaan, a young analyst named Calvin Drake was sitting at his desk eating a meal he had reheated twice already. He had a cup of cold coffee beside him and a screen full of sensor data in front of him. He was 26 years old and had been working this shift for 9 hours. He saw the blip. He sat up straight. He checked it twice. He cross-referenced it against the log from the perimeter beacon. Then he picked up his comm unit and called his superior, Lieutenant Commander Diane Owens, who was in the middle of reading a report in her office 2 corridors away. Diane listened to Calvin describe what he was seeing. She did not interrupt him. When he finished, there was a brief silence on the line, then she said, "Log it. Let them come in a little further." Calvin looked at his screen. He looked at the 11 blips moving slowly past the boundary line, heading deeper into human space, completely unaware of the small drone riding on their hull. He typed up the log entry with careful, steady hands. On the other side of the perimeter, Xyrith stood at his viewport and watched the buoys fall behind his fleet. He felt good. He felt like a man who had just walked through a door that everyone told him was locked. The door had not been locked at all. What Xyrith did not know, and what he would spend the next several hours slowly beginning to understand, was that some doors are left open on purpose. The deeper the Velthari fleet went, the more ordinary everything looked. That was the problem. They passed a cluster of automated mining platforms orbiting a cold, rocky moon. The platforms moved in slow, even circles, their drill arms turning, their lights blinking on schedule. No one hailed the Velthari fleet. No alarm sounded. The platforms just kept working, the way machines do when no one has told them to stop, they passed 3 cargo haulers on the inner shipping lane. Big, slow ships loaded with materials heading toward a colony world somewhere further in. The haulers did not change course. They did not speed up or slow down. They just kept going, steady and quiet, like they had not noticed 11 foreign warships sitting in the middle of their lane. Xyrath watched them pass and felt the good feeling from earlier start to fade a little. Orith was at his station. He had not left it since they crossed the perimeter. He was running the same scan over and over, adjusting the parameters each time, looking for something he could not quite name. His hands moved carefully. His eyes stayed on the screen that he noticed the spacing first. The mining platforms were too evenly arranged. Not the way things drift into place over years of use, but the way things are placed by someone who thought very carefully about where each one should go. He noticed the haulers next. Their course corrections were too smooth, too precise. A human pilot correcting for gravitational drift would do it in small, slightly uneven bursts. These corrections were perfect that he noticed that no one was panicking. That in Oritha's experience, when a foreign military fleet entered your space unannounced, someone panicked. A civilian transport changed course. A mining crew sent a distress call. Someone, somewhere, did something that showed they knew something was wrong. It was a natural thing. It was what living creatures did when danger was nearby. Here, nothing moved differently. Nothing changed. The sector went about its business as if the Velthari were not there at all. Orith found this deeply unsettling. He thought about saying something to Xyrath. He decided to keep scanning instead. Far away from the fleet, on Fort Alderaan, Admiral Leon Hargrove was sitting in a small conference room with a cup of actual hot coffee and a display showing the Velthari fleet's position in real time. He was 63 years old. He had a quiet face and gray hair cut short and hands that had stopped being restless a long time ago. He had fought in 2 frontier wars and come home from both of them. He had learned, in the years since, that the most dangerous thing you could do in a crisis was hurry. Diane Owen stood across the table from him and walked him through the situation. 11 ships. Velthari Dominion Registry. Crossed the perimeter 40 minutes ago. No weapons hot. No communications sent. Moving slow and quiet, like they were trying to look at things without being seen. Leon listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he set his coffee down and gave 3 orders. The first was to quietly reroute all civilian traffic in the affected sector through automated command signals. No announcements. No alerts to the civilian ships. The command would reach their navigation systems directly and adjust their courses without the crews knowing why. It would look natural. It would look like routine corrections. The second was to move 6 rapid response frigates into a passive drift formation around the Velthari fleet, using the background radiation of a nearby nebula as cover. The frigates would run cold, no active sensors, no emissions. They would be invisible. They would stay invisible until told otherwise. The third was to let 1 ship through. The cargo freighter Copperhill was already in the sector, piloted by a contractor named Lou Grady, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s who had been moving cargo through frontier space for 20 years and had seen most of what the universe had to offer. Leon's staff contacted Lou directly and told him what they needed. Lou asked one question, which was whether he should look worried. He was told no, just normal. The Copperhill passed within close visual range of Xyratha's command ship. Lou Grady brought it in slow, not hiding, not rushing. And as his cockpit passed level with the Velthari viewport, he turned his head, looked directly at the alien ship, and waved that it was a casual wave. The kind a man gives to a neighbor he sees most mornings. One hand raised, a small motion, and then he was looking forward again, moving on, not concerned. On the Velthari bridge, Orith watched it happen. He watched the human ship pass without fear or alarm. He watched the human pilot wave at them as if they were a mildly interesting thing he had spotted on his commute. Orith was quiet for a long moment, then he told Xyrath, in a low voice, that he thought they should talk about what they were doing here. Station Caden was not an impressive place. It sat along the inner shipping lane like a rest stop on a long road, functional and a little worn around the edges. Its docking corridor smelled like recycled air and metal polish. The lights in the main hall were the steady, neutral kind that did not flicker and did not make anyone feel anything in particular. There were scuff marks on the floor from years of cargo being moved through. A potted plant sat in the corner near the waiting area, somehow still alive despite clearly being forgotten about on a regular basis. Diane Owens arrived at Station Caden ahead of the Velthury fleet. She came alone, in a small diplomatic-class courier ship, and she docked without ceremony. She did not bring a security team. She did not bring extra weapons or a formal delegation or any of the things that most species brought when they were preparing to confront an unauthorized military force inside their territory. She brought herself, a change of clothes, and a travel mug she had filled with coffee before leaving Fort Alderaan. She also brought Corporal Pete Navarro. Pete was 29 years old and had the calm, unhurried manner of someone who had decided long ago that most things were not worth getting worked up about. He was not especially large. He was not visibly armed, though he was. He carried a small handheld reader and spent most of his time looking at it. He had been assigned to Diane's detail for 8 months and she had come to appreciate the fact that he did not ask unnecessary questions. They stood in the docking corridor and waited. The Velthury delegation came aboard 11 minutes later. There were 6 of them, wearing full tactical armor and carrying visible weapons on their hips. They moved the way soldiers move when they want to look ready for anything. They stopped when they saw Diane. She was standing in the middle of the corridor with her travel mug in her hand, looking at them the way a person looks when a meeting has started slightly later than they expected. Not angry. Not afraid. Mildly inconvenienced. Pete was leaning against the wall to her left, reading his handheld screen. Xyrath stepped forward. He was tall, his dark eyes moving quickly across the corridor, checking for threats he could understand. He did not find any. He looked at the human woman with the coffee cup and said that he was Commander Xyrath of the Velthury Dominion, and that he demanded to know what authority she represented. Diane said, "My name is Diane Owens. You are inside human space without clearance. I am here to have a conversation about that." That was her entire introduction. What followed was not a standoff. It was not a negotiation. It was a careful, steady conversation in which Diane answered every question the Velthury asked with complete honesty and no emotion, in the tone of a person explaining something that everyone in the room should already know. She told them about the tag drone on the hull of their command ship. She told them its identification code and the exact moment it had attached. She told them about the 6 frigates that had been drifting around their fleet for the past 2 hours, running cold, invisible. She told them the names of the frigates, their classes, their weapons loadouts. She told them how many targeting locks were currently sitting open on each of the 11 Velthury ships. She said none of it like a threat. She said it the way someone reads back a receipt. Xyrath stood very still during all of this. His soldiers behind him had stopped moving. One of them, near the back, shifted his weight very slightly. Then Diane asked if any of them wanted coffee. Xyrath did not respond for a moment. He was a commander who had trained for many kinds of confrontations. He had trained for aggression and for diplomacy and for the kind of cold negotiation where both sides pretended to be calm while actually measuring each other for weakness. He had no training for this. He did not know what box to put this in. He asked her why she was alone. Diane said she was not alone. She had Pete. Pete did not look up from his screen. Xyrath asked her if she was trying to intimidate them by showing she did not need to bring more people. Diane thought about that for a moment, then said no, she had just come to talk, and bringing a lot of people to a conversation tended to make everyone nervous, and nervous people made conversations harder. She said she would rather have an easy conversation. Xyrath looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Pete, who turned a page on his screen. He asked what would happen next. Diane said that depended entirely on what the Velthury decided to do, and that she was happy to explain all of their options, but first she wanted to tell them a few things about the history of human space, because she thought it would be useful context. Xyrath said he was listening. Diane took a sip of her coffee and began. Xyrath had asked one question before Diane began. He had asked it plainly, the way a soldier asks something when he already suspects the answer but needs to hear it said out loud. He asked, "Why have you not attacked us? You have had the advantage since we crossed your border." Diane looked at him for a moment. She set her coffee cup down on a nearby ledge. Then she said, "Because we have done this before." She did not say it with pride. She said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. The first story she told was about a species called the Durth. They had come into human space about 60 years ago, while humanity was still new to the wider galaxy and still figuring out where all the lines were. The Durth had not come quietly. They had come with a war fleet, weapons charged, and they had opened fire on a human colony world without a single word of communication first. They had not asked for anything. They had not made demands. They had simply started shooting. Diane said it in a flat, even voice. She said that humans lost 11 ships and 4,000 people in the first 3 hours. She said the battle lasted 9 days. She said the Durth fleet did not return home. She did not describe the battle in detail. She did not need to. Xyrath was quiet. One of his soldiers behind him made a small sound. The second story was about a species called the Merith Collective, who were clever and patient and had decided that fighting humans directly was too costly. So instead they had sent a covert team to a human colony world, a small group of specialists with the goal of gathering intelligence and making contact with any human factions that might be willing to cooperate against the central government. It was a careful plan. It had taken years to put together. Diane paused and said, "The team was never found." She let that sit for a moment before continuing. She said the Merith Collective had received a formal diplomatic warning after that, delivered politely, with full documentation of what had happened and what humans expected going forward. The collective had considered the warning, decided that humans were bluffing, and sent a second covert team 6 months later. Diane said, they were not given a second warning. She did not explain what that meant. She moved on. The third story was about a species she did not name. She said only that they had been smart enough not to fight directly and patient enough not to send covert teams. Instead they had spent years reaching out to human separatist movements in the outer colonies, funding small groups that had grievances with the central government, encouraging instability. It was a slow strategy. It was a good strategy. She said it had been 30 years ago. She said the frontier had been quiet since then. She paused again. This time it was a longer pause. She looked at Xyrath directly and said, "I am not going to tell you exactly what happened to that species, because I do not think I need to. What I will tell you is that their leadership spent a long time after that moment thinking very carefully about whether their strategy had been worth the outcome. Most of them concluded it had not been." Xyrath had not moved from his spot. His hands were still at his sides. He was listening with the full attention of a man who had just realized that the conversation he thought he was walking into was not the conversation he was actually in. Diane picked up her coffee cup again. She said there was a fourth story, and this one was different from the others. She said the fourth species had done almost exactly what the Velthari had done today. They had crossed the perimeter quietly, moved into human space without clearance, and gotten deep enough in to think they understood what they were looking at. They had also met a human representative in a place much like this corridor, and they had also been told, calmly and completely, everything that humans had already done in response to their arrival. The difference was what happened next. That species had made a decision in that corridor. They had looked at the situation clearly, without pride getting in the way, and they had understood that the smart move and the right move were the same move. They had requested a formal diplomatic channel. They had gone home. They had talked to their government. They had come back with people who were authorized to have real conversations. Diane said, that was 18 years ago. They have a permanent diplomatic office on Earth now. They sit on the Human Trade Council. Last year their ambassador came to a memorial service for the humans lost in the Durth War and stood there in the rain with everyone else and did not say a word, just stood there, and that meant a great deal to a lot of people. She was quiet for a moment after that, then she looked at Xyrath and said, "I have told you 4 stories. I want you to decide which one yours is going to be." The corridor was very still. Pete turned another page on his screen. Xyrath took 20 minutes that he asked Diane to give him time to speak with his officers in private, and she said of course, and walked to the small waiting area near the potted plant and sat down and finished her coffee. Pete came and stood beside her. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say. When Xyrath came back, he looked like a man who had set something heavy down. That he said that the Velthari Dominion would request a formal diplomatic channel within the next standard cycle. He said that the fleet would return to the perimeter immediately and that no weapons had been or would be discharged. He said that he personally wished to be clear that this incursion had been his decision alone, made on incomplete intelligence, and that it was not the official position of the Velthari government. Diane nodded and said she understood, and that she would note all of that in her report. Then she thanked him for the conversation, and she meant it. The escort appeared as the Velthari fleet turned back toward the perimeter. It did not come from any direction in particular. It was simply there, the way things are there when they have been waiting in the dark for a while and have finally decided to be visible. 6 frigates, close and steady. 2 destroyers sitting a little further back, patient and huge. And at the center of the formation, drifting along at the exact same speed as the Velthari fleet, a single carrier-class vessel that had been sitting quietly in this sector the entire time, its hull dark against the stars, its running lights off. No weapons were pointed at anyone. No targeting systems were hot. The formation held a careful, courteous distance from the Velthari ships, matching their speed exactly, not crowding, not threatening. The way a very large person walks you to the door without touching you. Orith stood at his sensor station and watched the escort form around them. He counted the ships carefully. He counted them again. He ran the numbers through the fleet comparison model in his head and did not like what came out. Then he started noticing the gaps. There were places in the formation where the sensor return felt slightly wrong. Not wrong enough to flag as a contact, not wrong enough to be certain of anything, but wrong in the way that a shadow is wrong when the angle of the light does not quite match where the shadow falls. He ran his scan wider. He looked at the background noise around the formation. He looked at the space between the stars. He thought he counted 9 more ships. He was not sure. He could not be sure. He went to Zyrith and said quietly that he believed there were additional human vessels in this sector that had not revealed themselves. Zyrith looked at him and asked how he knew. Orith said he did not know. He said he was just assuming. Zyrith turned back to his viewport and watched the escort hold its steady position alongside his fleet, and he thought about that word. Assuming. He thought about what it meant that his most experienced officer, a man who had survived 3 wars by paying attention to what was real and ignoring what was not, had decided that the correct approach to this situation was to assume that things were worse than they appeared. He thought about Diane Owen standing in a corridor with a coffee cup, telling him 4 stories without raising her voice once. He thought about the human pilot who had waved at his ship like a man saying good morning to a neighbor. The Helios perimeter came into view ahead. The little buoys blinked their small lights into the dark, same as always. At the boundary line, Zyrith transmitted one final message to Diane on the station. He said that the Velthari Dominion would reach out through proper channels and that he personally hoped the conversation they had today would be remembered as the beginning of something and not the end of something. Diane received the message in her office at Station Caden. She read it once. Then she sent back 2 words, "We agree." The Velthari fleet crossed the perimeter and disappeared into open space. The escort formation held its position for 6 minutes after the last Velthari ship cleared the line. Then it dispersed without ceremony, the ships peeling off in different directions, going back to wherever they had come from, settling back into the dark. On Fort Alderaan, Calvin Drake closed the incident file. He logged the Velthari fleet's departure time, noted the tag drone's last known position for retrieval, and marked the event status as resolved. It had taken him about 2 minutes. He filed it the way he filed everything, neatly and without drama, in the long-running record of things that had happened at the border and had not become something worse. He went back to his cold coffee. In his office down the corridor, Admiral Leon Hargrove reviewed the report summary that Diane had sent through. He read it without expression. He approved it with a single keystroke and returned it to the record. He picked up his own coffee and looked out the small viewport beside his desk at the stars. They did not look any different than usual. The Helios perimeter, the beacon that had spoken to the Velthari fleet, reset itself. It ran its self-check, confirmed all systems were functional, and went quiet again. It turned its sensors back to the empty space beyond the boundary line and waited in the way that it always waited, patient and steady, for the next ship that would come without asking. The border held, the warning stood, and out in the dark beyond the perimeter, the stars kept shining, same as always, over a line that most of the galaxy had learned, one way or another, not to cross.